Whether it's Halloween or not, horror is a genre that many people enjoy watching, whether they're terrified or not. We had heard a lot of bone-wrecking stories that brought chills to our bones, from stories to real-life events. We know that talking about it will be a roller coaster of varied emotions and experiences, especially since cemeteries are where haunting souls always reappear. Here are 5 real creepy cemetery horror stories that keep you up at night. Keith worked as a cemetery manager, and part of his job included meeting with guests and family members of the deceased to arrange funerals, facilitate plot sales, and so on. Antonio, a 30-something-year-old spiritual man, once sat down with him to purchase a plot for his sick father. Antonio was a Hispanic man with a strong accent who showed Keith images of his father, who appeared to be far too young to be taken away from his family, but the man's time had come. The following week, Antonio planned his father's funeral service at the cemetery. It had been a very stormy day, which is regarded to be a positive sign. Keith stepped outside beneath the front awning of the building and noticed Antonio in the automobile behind the hearse as the funeral procession came to a halt in front of the front office building. They exchanged waves, and due to the inclement weather, he returned inside until the procession was ready to continue to the burial place. Keith climbed into one of the cemetery's pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop, where he would stand with his umbrella, supervising as part of his duties. He performed some laps around the place in the truck after the funeral, as he did at least a couple of times a day. He had a lot of paperwork to deal with, and on top of that, he had to close the cemetery that night, so he went back to his desk a bit later. The cemetery shuts at 5:30 p.m., so as soon as it got dark, he drove around the grounds again to make sure all visitors had left. Then he drove over to the front gate and closed it. He was driving back to his workplace when he believed he noticed someone hurrying down one of the lanes of tombstones before disappearing behind a hedge. He beeped his horn to let them know the restaurant was closed, but he never saw them again. He grabbed his umbrella and dashed out into the pouring rain. He didn't notice anyone. He looked around in the rain for at least 20 minutes before giving up. He drove back up to the office and combed through the CCTV footage, none of which detected any odd movement, despite the fact that visibility had been reduced due to the storm and it was now pitch black outside. He was trying to multitask while finishing up some paperwork and keeping an eye on the webcam when he heard the front door of the visitation room slam shut. He jumped out of the chair and cried, "Hey!" His initial assumption was that it was the same person he had seen previously. Maybe they were stuck in the graveyard and were looking to help to get out. He entered the foyer, but no one was present. He looked around and said, "Hey," again. He began glancing out all the windows and came to a halt when he noticed someone on the other side staring back at him with a blank expression. He backed up and screamed, but they didn't even flinch. When he realized he recognized this Hispanic older-appearing man in his brain, he took a step closer and gave a squinty-eyed, bewildered face. It reminded him completely of the photographs of Antonio's father that he had shown him. Keith dashed out of the front door and to the side where he saw the man, but he was gone. Keith stood in the rain, becoming soaking, then raced back inside, collected his belongings, locked them up, and drove home. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos. It was a dreary, cold, and rainy February Sunday. Every Sunday, on our way to church, we passed by this old cemetery, and every Sunday I would see him, a sad old man smoking a cigarette in a red checkered flannel and a red trucker hat. I always noticed him since he always seemed unhappy. He was always staring down at the earth beneath his feet, never displaying his face. I imagined the grave belonged to his late wife. "It's very sad watching that old man," I said one Sunday. "Every Sunday he pays his respects to the grave. He must have adored her." "What are you talking about?" my husband and daughter, who were in the car, both asked. "There is no one present." "There is," I confirmed. "He's wearing a red flannel shirt and a trucker hat." "All right, whatever you say," my husband adds as he and my daughter both chuckle nervously. "You guys are ridiculous. I'm not sure why you're acting this way. He's depressed," I said. No one else sat up, but I was eager to prove them wrong and myself correct. So the next day, I decided to make a quick visit to the cemetery site and photograph it. I parked around 10 yards away. That day was bitterly chilly, damp, and dark, despite the fact that it was only 3 p.m. As I walked to the grave, I noted that there were no cigarette butts inside. 8 yards, 7 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, and still no signs. I eventually got to the gravestone and found his photo on it. The same checkered shirt, trucker hat, and everything else. I ran for my life and never looked back, and I haven't seen the elderly man in the checkered shirt and trucker hat since. We moved into a trailer park when I was 14 years old. We were living in an old trailer with mold in the ceilings and the floor sinking in some places. The first few days weren't too horrible, but then everything started to go wrong. I observed cold spots in various places of the trailer, especially in my room and the living room. We also had a little, narrow hallway, and every time I walked down it, I felt like someone was following me. Because my family is Catholic, I had a portrait of the Virgin Mary hanging in my room near the entrance. When the lights went out one night, my 3 siblings and I dashed to our parents' room. We heard the same booming footsteps running towards my parents' bedroom from the ceiling. My mom urged us to close our eyes since the door had split open. She recently stated that she saw a dark, lengthy figure standing by the door that night. Years later, we spoke with one of the park's managers, who showed us an old photo album of what the trailer park used to be. Everything made sense because it was a cemetery. When I was in 5th grade, my grandma and I went to visit my pop-up cemetery. He died in the hospital about a year and a half prior. So as our grandma was having some alone time, we were meant to be returning to the car. I observed this woman, perhaps in her 20s, who seemed depressed, so I went to check on her. She was dressed in a red dress and a bonnet, but wore no shoes. When I asked her why she was crying, she said it was for herself. I explained to her why we were all there that day and that it was alright for her to miss the people we had buried. She and I talked for about 15 minutes, and her replies did not always make sense. But I ignored it, assuming it was just because I was young. I didn't realize we were getting further and further away from my family until I heard them calling for me. I told her I had to leave, but hoped she would feel better soon. When I turned around to see where my family was, I noticed that a portion of her head was missing. Even though she was only a few yards away, I felt her touch me and whisper in my ear that she could make the pain go away sooner. I made my way to the car, and once inside with the door shut, I looked back to see her walking through a tree and kneeling before a tombstone near my pops. Suddenly, she simply vanished. My sister continues to assert that there were no other people in the cemetery, but I know she was there. When we were teenagers, my friends and I were quite stupid. When this happened, I was probably 17 or 18. It was October, and I wanted to do something terrifying in honor of Halloween. There's a tiny cemetery about 10 minutes from my house, and when I was intoxicated with a couple pals, I suggested we sneak into it. Ryan and Mike's names will be made up by myself. Ryan's house was where we were. He never drank, so I came up with the notion. He was in charge of driving us to the cemetery. Mike and I were the ones that had to go. Ryan was only along for the ride, but he hadn't been drinking. Ryan parked across the street in a parking lot. Because it was after midnight, the town was deserted. As we hopped the fence into the cemetery, we made sure no one could see us. It wasn't completely dark, but it was difficult to see more than 10 feet ahead of us. As a result, we were all using our iPhone flashlights. We separated because there didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery. Ryan appeared to be paying closer attention to Mike. Because of the lighting, I could still see where they were. I ventured off on my own a little further and decided to start filming a frightening video. Thus, with the lights still on, I began recording. I captured a handful of old headstones on the cemetery's overall eerie vibe at night. I hadn't seen Mike or Ryan in a while, so I went looking for them to check whether they were still recording. I froze when I saw a woman dressed in a white gown or a frock with long, gray-looking hair on my phone screen. She was staring at the ground. I raised my head from my phone screen to meet her in person, but she was gone, and I began to back away. I returned my gaze to my phone screen, and there she was again. She was only now gazing into the camera, or rather, at me. I looked up from the phone again and couldn't see her, so I looked back down at the screen and saw her getting closer to me. As I ran away from that area, I began to yell for Mike and Ryan. I couldn't see the lights anywhere since they weren't responding to my screams. I had a sense they were going to try to terrify me, so I went back to the cemetery fence and hopped it to get out. I got to Ryan's car and texted the two of them that they needed to get out of the cemetery right away. They met me there minutes later. We were all sitting in the car when I showed them the video I had taken, and they all looked horrified. I could see the moment when the woman gently moved her head from gazing at the ground to looking at me, and then began to move towards me, now that I was actually viewing the entire video. That concludes today's stories. Which of these is your personal favorite? Do you have any paranormal encounters? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section below. We would love to hear it. Please remember to like, share and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this scary series and stay tuned for more videos in the future. I'll see you guys later.